Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie May. I'm joining you from Seattle, Washington. Glad to be here today for your Lunch and Learn and to share a little bit with you when I can find my slides among my many open things here. There we go. A little talk about web maps. Sarah, you can see my screen, right?
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. Okay. This is my first time attending one of your Lunch and Learns. But I will say I personally love interaction. So I'm going to ask a couple times for things like raise of hands. I hope that, if you know how to do that through Google Meet, do it. I'm going to give a little bit of a talk, but, I'm going to ask for feedback too about what folks already know. And I would love to move into a good long Q&A so that we can answer whatever questions you have about web maps. Okay, with that, I'll begin. My talk is titled Beyond the GIS Desktop, Building Engaging Web Maps with Open Source Tools. Curious to hear from the audience with a quick show of hands. That can be hands in the little meet controls. Who has used Leaflet, MapLibre, OpenLayers, or another web mapping library? Okay. Good number of folks. Great. Okay. Who knows what they would build if your current knowledge or web map tools did not constrain you? Meaning, like, you have a project in mind, you're just not really sure you have what you need to execute it. No takers there. Okay, one. Okay. Couple? Okay. Great. Okay. And then third question. So reset again. Who relies on Esri tools for day-to-day work? Okay. It's like everyone. Which is what I thought, which is absolutely what I thought, and great. That means I know, we have some common background, we have some common language to work with, and I have a bit of a sense of where to go from here. Okay, so a little bit about me. I am what I'll refer to as a cartographer between systems, meaning I came from a traditional GIS background, but I gravitated toward open source software and cartography pretty early in graduate school, largely because at the time, it was just easier for me to use R and Python than to keep doing my thesis work in Esri tools. And then from there, I went and worked in the tech industry. I worked for Apple for a bunch of years, and, Esri isn't available to this day, isn't really Mac compatible. So I was kind of an early adopter and then kind of a forced adapter of all of the open source geospatial stacks. And I would say that I've kind of had front row seats over the last 15 years for how I would say it's initially been a bifurcation of those two stacks between, open source GIS like QGIS, but then there's this whole other stack around web maps that's developed mostly on the open source side, and it's making its way into the GIS world. It's made its way. It's come a really long way from when I was working for city government back in the aughts. Web mapping technology has, but there's still this divide in how people think about things and how people talk about things. So that's kind of where I tend to sit a lot of times is bridging that divide. I'm teaching GIS and cartography within the Esri stack at the University of Washington currently. I'm on the board of MapLibre, which is one of the main open source web mapping libraries that you might encounter and use. And really kind of how I situate and manage that is that I've always been primarily a cartographer, so primarily focused on thinking through all of the aspects of of display and presentation and communication that come along with making maps. Although I can nerd out about analysis all day, that's kind of most comfortably where I sit as a cartographer. So first thing, and I actually just sandwiched this slide in today because I thought like, okay, I hadn't initially stuck this slide in here for you all, but it is just kind of table stakes for our conversation. So I'm just going to explain it. I'm sure some of you already know this, but it's pretty fundamental. Like I find it comes up a lot, and it's kind of the crux of where the divide is between what GIS folks understand and take to be a given and what folks on the web mapping stand maybe understand, probably not. They probably don't even really understand this. But I don't know how I don't know how many people in the room remember the MapQuest days, like so before Google Maps, when you would get driving directions, you had to like click up and click over and like do all the stuff like that. We're all grateful that Google Maps has saved us from that UI experience, but there's a lot, I think, of I would say misperception about what Google did there and how they did it. So Google developed their own projection back in 2007 to 2011, initially quite to the consternation of the geodesy community because they did it in their own hacky way, but they did it for a really fundamental good reason, which is that, I think I'd say further, it's a Mercator projection, which, right, we as GIS professionals, we as cartographers understand distorts, when you view the world map this way, it distorts the proportions, especially at the poles. And it's given cartography, this particular projection has given cartography a pretty bad name. So that's problematic, except that it also has these really positive side benefits. Because Mercator is a conformal projection, it allowed what Google was doing there was making these squares, and these squares can be broken down into uniform tiles. And because of the way the projection works, because it's you can picture that diagram from when you were in school of the piece of paper wrapped around the light bulb. Every single the projection works by making every point that you're viewing things at right angles. So zooming and panning and all those behaviors we associate with navigating a modern web map are directly a result of the fact that we're using Web Mercator. So although we're no longer using that initial version that Google put out, every modern web map, every one that I'm going to talk to, everyone, including Esri, is using some version of Web Mercator in their maps. And there've been, and that's what allows up in this upper right-hand corner, that's what allows for that nice panning and zooming. That's what allows us to have this kind of infinite transition in scale from the world all the way down to the scale of a building. That's what's enabling all of that. And I think, a lot of the libraries have gotten hip to the problematic aspects of Mercator when you view it at the world scale, which is why a lot of them have gone to the globe. This is important to understand, though, because you'll see like people will come into this space, especially from the GIS world, and be like, well, I need a web map library that supports projections. And maybe you do and maybe you don't, because the thing is, even the ones that support projections are doing some like extremely expensive version of reprojection on the fly in order to give you that other projection, because fundamentally this is just how panning and zooming work. Okay, so with that out of the way, I'm going to just give you a few. I hope that you're thinking about what questions you have. Feel free to just start sharing them in the comments. I don't have enough multitask ability to be reading them as I go, but I will get to them. And I want to hear any specific questions that you start to have. And the rest of my presentation is really kind of framing up maybe how to think about this so that, you have, those questions can spontaneously pop into your mind if they're not there already. Okay, so one thing that's fundamental, I teach Esri tools every day. They're really, really great. They're great on so many levels, and they're great for teaching students because it's the full package, and you can teach them everything, including Experience Builder and ArcGIS Online. So I think one of the first questions that I would have if I were you would be like, okay, well, like in my mind at least, is like, when would I actually want to use some of these open source web mapping libraries versus just ArcGIS Online and Experience Builder for something that I'm going to put out on the web for the public world? And the best way that I can answer that question is by saying like, okay, so, there's some things where, it's just, if you have, your agency has a data set and you're just putting it out there and you're updating it all the time, you're paying for this big site license, you have the tools to publish it using ArcGIS Online or Experience Builder, and that just makes sense. Obviously, you're going to do that. But there are also times, which I would characterize as the times when the map itself is the product and you just want something, that the web map that you're producing is going to reach your audience better if it performs more like the consumer maps that folks are used to. I would characterize those times as the times when the map itself is the product. And in those times, you're going to reach your audience much better with a custom web map than you would with a configured Esri web app. So that's really my conception and the way that I think about this. So it's really not about replacing any of the GIS platforms. It's just recognizing that you have these options. And what I would say further is there's actually there's like a deep, dark world of ways that you can publish feature services and all of the various Esri ArcGIS Online components and display them in these web maps. There's like every type of hybridization for what can happen here. But fundamentally, if you're just thinking about it, as when would I go this route? How do I keep my life simple? And when would I go this route versus the other route? I think you'd move more so towards the custom web map option when you really want to kind of cut away everything and communicate to the public directly with something that's very custom. Okay, so the next thing I'll say about this, so if you're taking on a custom web mapping project with one of these open source libraries, I would say view yourself, you within your job are going to have to view yourself as sort of a small publishing house, right? It's not going to be as straightforward. It's never going to be as straightforward as if you're just working from a desktop GIS and then pushing and it's there. You have to think through, okay, what's the core data that I want to show? How am I going to, is it content? Is it static content or is it dynamic? And, how am I going to prep it? How do I export it from the system that it's managed in? Or do I? And if I don't, then how do I manage that? What's the public web space where I'm going to host this intermediate data? And on the display side, what kind of interactions, what kind of customizations are really going to help my audience wrap their minds around these? Really, I think if you're going to go to the effort here, it's worth it, to get all of the benefits and advantages of using one of these open source modern web mapping libraries. You want to step back and think about all of these 4 steps. And I say that because a lot of people, it might think, well, the mapping library is just the browser. It's just a browser display. So that's all that really should work. But because of these other components, because it relies on Web Mercator on the back end, there are many people who will tell you, oh, it's easy, like point and click, you can publish it just like you would from desktop GIS. And those people, they're not wrong, but you're shoehorning something in that doesn't quite belong. And you may or may not get the results that you're really looking for. And you may or may not have the easy time that was advertised. Okay, so given that, why should you go to the effort, and why would you even make an effort like this? Well, because in the last 10 years, these open source libraries, as they've become more prominent and common, have really kind of changed the stakes of what you can do with a web map. And what I would hate to see is for all of the GIS folks doing amazing work inside of government and public agencies to get to be not part of what's possible now. So here's just 4 examples of, a common different web mapping types, your standard locator map, your trail map, your asset map, your mapping application. 10 years ago, lots of kludgy bad cartography was just the norm in these things. But these days, it's actually relatively easy to produce stuff that's really nice. A lot of it, the vector tile I'm assuming this audience understands fundamentally the distinction between vectors and rasters, and that carries through to web maps as well. You have raster tile maps, and then you have vector tile maps, and vector tile maps are infinitely more customizable, and they allow for a lot of customization, and but at the same time, raster tile maps can still give you a lot of performance and a lot of benefit when you know how to integrate the pieces and build the two. Okay, so now coming finally to what am I talking about when I talk about open source libraries? There's three main ones that people use currently that are under active development, and they have a good amount of overlap, but there are reasons why you might pick one over, one amongst all the others. So the first one that you may have heard of, the one is Leaflet. So Leaflet and OpenLayers, actually, I will say, have some common history. Leaflet spun out of OpenLayers. Leaflet is known for being simple. It's fundamentally built only with raster tiles. You can get plugins for it. You can use plugins with it so that you can integrate vector tiles in there. But fundamentally, the core library, it's intended to be very simple. The documentation is nice and tight and compact. But really, it's your standard locator map. You have a base map that's going to be raster tiles, and maybe you're bringing in some other vector data that you're putting on top, usually as a GeoJSON. You've got pop-ups, you've got markers. You're mostly going to have static data, but it's easy and it's lightweight. And if you're doing something like, if you have, say, a WordPress site or something where it's just got to be simple, or you just want something simple, Leaflet is a great bet. It's very performant. It's very easy to use. It's very straightforward. Now, the next one here in the chain, MapLibre, is, many of you may know that MapLibre is the open source fork of Mapbox. So about 6 years ago, when Mapbox made the decision to go closed source, some people popped up and preserved the existing Mapbox code base from that time around 2020, and have been building on it ever since. The advantage that MapLibre has over, say, Leaflet is it's at its core, it's a vector rendering library, which means you can customize the styles. You can have all kinds of, you can be interacting with those vectors directly in someone's browser. You can do more with real-time data. It also has both a mobile library that's tightly coupled with the web library. There's been a lot of development around 3D, and we're going through another one of these waves of digital twins. It's amazing how that just keeps coming up. But so that's really where MapLibre is that's its real sweet spot. Although it can do all of the things that I was describing with Leaflet as well. And then your third one is OpenLayers, and OpenLayers is the big guy, the big heavy guns here in a lot of ways. OpenLayers is the open source library that spent the most time on GIS interoperability, which means, say, if you are an agency where there's some regulation that says like you absolutely can't use WebMercator, or you have to be using the specific state plane, or you have to be using whatever. OpenLayers is your bet. Again, know that under the hood, it's still projecting things back and forth between WebMercator, but it can help. It's the one that's been built out the most around handling projections, and also just in general around handling complex GIS analysis. By handling it, I mean, like, they make it, if you're a GIS professional, they're going to make it more possible for you to do it. I don't mean they've totally crushed all of the things that make that technically really challenging on the web. So in terms of performance, MapLibre is more performant, faster in general. and Leaflet is way more lightweight. But OpenLayers, if you need it, it's there. I do know people who swear by this one as well. Most people, I would say, will do most of their work in one of these three. You do not need to learn all three. If people do, people can switch between them, but don't feel like in order to, understand this world, you have to be proficient in learning all three of these. You can pick one. You can do your project in one. And that is perfectly reasonable, and do a lot of projects in just one of these. So with that, I would love to start turning it over to you. I just have a few more things to share here, and my interface to adjust a little bit here. How can I see the controls down at the bottom in Meet? Really good question I have for myself. Yeah. Hold on. Okay, so I don't know. So hold on, let me escape out of this. Just to say the last few things on this slide that I wanted to share with you. A couple of step-by-step web tutorials that you can go through and do if you want to just get an introduction to using this. They're built on MapLibre in particular because I'm on the board of MapLibre. I've got an introduction to web maps. That's the first link here, and I'm happy to share this deck with you. And I've got another one that's longer. So the first one was for State of the Map US this year. I've got another one that was from a 3-hour workshop I did in New Zealand at Phosphor-G last year. And both of these are just like super simple tutorials that will take you from start to finish through just, no platform, just building a web map. Couple QR codes here if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to get to my GitHub, which is where you can click through and find these tutorials, that QR code there, and then a few different links for how to get to the documentation for these 3 main web libraries. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. I would love to hear what questions you have or what comments you have or anything of that kind. Okay, so I've got one from Kristen. Hi, thanks. Have you encountered or heard of any pushbacks of using any of these open source tools from IT departments? Yes. Yes, I think the most common thing that I have heard is concerns about security. And some of that's pretty old school, right? So I've heard, and maybe not directly from IT departments, but I've heard from GIS analysts telling me like, oh yeah, I can't do this because, within my department, the IT says that, we have to use Esri because it's more secure. So I think the security concern is probably the big, I think that's kind of like an overarching, like easy answer for why an IT department doesn't want to support this. And it really has more to do with the security guarantees that Esri is going to give you, right? Like if you keep everything within the Esri system, right, then IT doesn't have to worry about you. Is really what it comes down to. It's not that there's like some sort of really like inherent, these libraries like MapLibre under the hood is what Amazon uses. It's what Meta uses. It's what Microsoft uses. When you go to Bing, like you're using MapLibre. Like these are well tested, performant, secure libraries. But, you can understand how IT department is concerned about rogue GIS analysts just going out there and publishing stuff. And I think some GIS departments are as well. So that, that is important. It's important to understand. I think one way to answer that is to recognize, like, so all the stuff I'm talking about with pulling stuff out of a GIS system, transforming it, and then publishing it. You can also, I'm sure some of you can imagine your bosses and your bosses' bosses kind of getting a little bit nervous about that. This is something that you would want to do where it's public, like there are some windows. I think I can see how there are, there's some places where you need some policy exceptions, but there's not really inherently a problem. But I think, yes, the pushback is there, and negotiating that requires understanding what the real concern is.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so what is the platform used for these technologies? No platform. So all of these, and that's why I built the tutorials that I built. Is you can use platforms, like MapTiler is built on MapLibre, say, so you can, if you wanted to create an account and have a full suite of tools that allows you to design everything, MapTiler is a good bet. Otherwise, you're just dealing with software libraries. The web versions are all JavaScript libraries, so you're just using JavaScript and working through the components of that. In the case of MapLibre, where there's also a library for mobile apps, then you're also dealing with Android and iOS and those languages. But there's no inherent platform. These are all just libraries intended for standardly a JavaScript implementation. So you can just, really, it's as simple as one line in an HTML page invokes the library, and then you're writing a little bit of JavaScript to get it to take over that HTML page and display a map. And then that web page becomes your platform. Hopefully that makes sense. Thanks, Paula. Okay, great. And then where is the data stored when pushed to the web? So the data, it depends on what your data is. So really, I can break this down into two main buckets. So either your data is stored in a tile server, which is just a special kind of web server. And a web server is something that exists in a public space on the internet. And the reason why it exists is because the internet needs some intermediary in order to determine how to fulfill your request. So it's like any database, right? That's why you have anytime you would need a database, you need a tile server there. The other place where your data might be stored is if it's static, like say something like a GeoJSON, or even in some cases a shapefile, although that's not a great web performant standard. Mostly it's KML or JSON that you would use here. That can be really in any space that's publicly available on the internet. So for the most part, when I'm building simple web spaces for my tutorials, I use GitHub because it has a built-in product called GitHub Pages, which gives you a public web space. And that makes it very easy for any static content, including map tiles, because the one other thing I'll say to answer this question of where is the data stored when it's pushed to the web, map tiles don't always require a tile server, because there's this technology called PM tiles. I don't know if anyone's heard of that one, but PM tiles it's just a file that contains the tiles, and it works the way the internet works, meaning you, instead of needing some sort of data server or database to answer the query about like what tile ranges am I showing on the map to show this map at any given scale, it just works through HTTP range requests and just pulls the right section out of that static file and displays it. So that's one that I use quite a lot in my tutorials as well, so that people don't have to set up web servers, and that can work quite well. And that's a good thing for all of you to know about who maybe negotiating with IT, and it gives them you can host all of it. Just all you need is some web space, whether it's GitHub Pages or, if your agency has a website, all you need is a folder to put your data in. Okay, so hopefully that answered your second question, Paula. Okay, and then Paula's got another question. Does the tile server or PM tiles exist in a secure S3 AWS-like bucket, or would you have to build it? So that's a great question. It could. So I think the one thing you can stick, like I'm saying, you can stick PM tiles just in any folder. It doesn't need to be anything special. It's faster and more performant if you put it in one of these buckets. The S3 is one example of this. It's actually not the most commonly used for PM tiles. The most commonly used is Cloudflare. Why? Because Cloudflare is basically free. You have to have a lot of usage to get to. Cloudflare is just the way they price their product that competes with S3. The buckets are they're very, very cost effective. So a lot of folks put their PM tiles in what's called S2. And there's documentation for all of this on the PM tiles website. You don't, and the other thing I'll say is you don't necessarily building it. I think a lot of people get daunted by this because it feels like it's going to be as hard as setting up a web server, but it's actually not. Like creating an S3 bucket or an equivalent Cloudflare bucket, it's actually much simpler. It's just really a matter of uploading, like creating an account and uploading a file. So there's not much to build, which is good news. It can be daunting still for sure, because there's all this like bonkers technical language that those companies like to use, but it is much simpler than running a web server. So that's it. So just to review, your three options are: number one, just as long as it's a relatively small file, say to a constrained geographic area, you're going to be able to get away with GitHub pages or your own static hosting site. If you're dealing with something bigger or you really care about performance, that's when you're going to move it to S3 or Cloudflare's equivalent. And in either case, ultimately it's just a static file. So setting it up is fairly simple. And yeah, like I say, both of the workshops that I have posted on this are relying on PM tiles for tiles. So you can kind of, if you click through those, you'll see how that is set up in the simplest cases. Any other questions? I'm curious, anyone want to share a project that they're thinking about or that they would like to do? Okay, well, I'll say, feel free to reach out to me. I do consulting on the side. If you wanna engage me in that way or talk more about that, I'm happy to talk to you. Go through my, if you're curious about this stuff and you wanna, and you get into one of my tutorials and you get stuck, ping me about that too. Great to have the opportunity to chat with you. Yeah, and enjoy your lunch.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely welcome.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie, so much for presenting today. It was really
informative. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure.
All right. That's the end of Stephanie's presentation. No one else has any more questions. I guess we can end Lunch and Learn today a little bit early. Thank you all so much for attending. Yeah, thank you again, Stephanie, for so much for presenting. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah.